Oh no!
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the beautiful Foundation building here in downtown Carlsbad in the Faces of Carlsbad. This is a program that many of you were going to, well, you might know the people we're going to be talking to, or then again, you might not have ever met them before. But we are sponsored by Intrepid Potash. We don't want to forget that wonderful company. And today, it is indeed a great pleasure for me to introduce a very nice lady, a very lovely lady, Mannie Bemis. Mannie, welcome to the Faces of Carlsbad.
Thank you, Bob.
By the time they're through, they're going to say, I know that lady. You know that? Anyway, what we do on this show basically is we start off with your ancestry, where it originated from, and what your mom and dad are doing, or what they've done in the past, and what you've been doing. And I know you personally, and I've known you a long time, and I know you're a very busy lady, so I'm going to let you carry on once we get to that point. Let's start out with your grandparents and your parents.
All right. Well, my grandmother was the first of my family to come here to Carlsbad. She came in 1932, and she was the secretary to Colonel Thomas Bowles at Carlsbad Caverns.
Wow.
So she worked at Carlsbad Caverns for about 16 years. My father came with her. He was a child at the time. He graduated from Carlsbad High School. And when he went to college, he went back to his home state of Kansas, where he met my mother at Fort Hays State College in Hays, Kansas.
Oh, yes.
Yep. They married and came down here and lived in Carlsbad, and this is where I was born. Grew up here. In 1968, the potash companies were quite depressed right then, and my father was a lawyer by then. He was representing U.S. Borax, which was one of the big companies here, and they moved out. So we left.
Your maiden, your dad's, your maiden.
My father was named Ray Sage.
Very
my
famous
mother,
man.
Elizabeth Sage, and he
Very
practiced
nice.
law here for 20 years.
Yeah.
We moved to Cruces, and that's where I graduated from high school finally. Had you in 6th grade.
Yes, that's
at
right. You
Sunset
were one of
School.
my best students, I must say. You were one of the best students, and you studied hard, and you learned a lot of things, I hope.
Oh, especially about geography.
Yeah. Well, it was fun in those days because you kids knew the capital cities of almost every country of the world and every state in the Union.
We did. You made us learn them.
Yeah. Well, anyway, your family, the background, though, originated where? In England, probably? England? Ireland?
My father's family came from Germany, and my mother's from Scotland.
And from Scotland. So,
But that goes back a few generations.
that Scottish background is very interesting because I fell in love with Scotland. They have a lot of great, famous writers there, and it's an amazing country. Anyway, a famous movie actor. Who is that famous male movie actor?
Oh, Mr. James Bond? James
yes,
Bond?
James Bond. That's right,
Sean
James Bond.
Connery.
Sean Connery. Yeah, he made a statement a while back. I understand that he's now living in the Caribbean island someplace, but he said he will not go back to Scotland until Scotland becomes a free country. So who knows what will happen in the future?
Probably
Well,
stay in the
anyway,
Caribbean.
your dad and mother were very nice people, and they backed me up 100%, and I always appreciated that. But your dad was a very well-known lawyer.
Well, I don't know if he was well known, but he had a good career here, and when he went to Las Cruces, he practiced law for 40 more years. So he was 89 years old when he retired 4 years ago. And at that time, he had been practicing. He was the oldest practicing lawyer in the state. He'd been practicing law for 60 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And look at all the problems that he had to face during those years.
Well, he enjoyed doing it, and he did a lot of good for people.
Yeah, he certainly did. Well, then what brought you back to Carlsbad?
Really, it was having a job being offered to me here. I didn't get my teaching degree until I had been out of school for a few years, had to go do a little bit of running around. So when I did get my degree at Las Cruces at NMSU, I started sending applications around and went to a job fair that they had there at the campus. And Carlsbad was there. It was Mr. Earwood was there recruiting people.
Yes.
And I went to the Carlsbad table and filled out an application. And then I didn't hear from anybody. It was hard to get a job teaching then. There were just a lot of teachers being churned out of the colleges. But I was over here visiting my sister, Katie Gaffney.
Yes, Katie.
Another one of your students.
Another one, yeah.
So Katie was teaching at what was then Edison School. And when I was here, it was just the way things worked out. You know, it was in the cards, because on that day, an opening came up at Edison. And John Redmond was looking for somebody to fill it.
Yes.
And so I went down and I interviewed with John, and he hired me that day. So I came here and ended up teaching school here for 26 years. I taught at Edison, first and second grade. Then when Edison closed, went over to Emmett Smith, taught first and second grade. And then the last 12 years of my career, I went up to the high school, and I taught theater arts there.
Yeah, I want to get into that. We were talking about John Redmond. John and I are close friends. We were friends from the first time I came out to this city. But didn't you feel welcomed when you started coming back to Carlsbad? This is a welcoming city, isn't it?
It was like coming back home.
Yeah.
It is. I was single then. I had a young son, whom you also had in class.
Yes, indeed.
And it was a good place to bring my son up. You know, I felt like it was a good place for me to grow up. It was a good place for him to grow up. I was real glad to get him back here, and enjoyed working at Edison School. John Redmond gave me my best introduction to teaching that I could have asked for. What a good principal he was.
Terrific.
Set the high academic standard and led by his own example.
Yes, outstanding. And then you met a very nice gentleman.
I did, yes.
What was his name again? Was it Tom?
I think so. I actually, this is kind of funny. You know, I'm a little bit older than Tom, just a year. But I remember in the recesses of my memory, living over on Walter Street when I was a child.
Oh, yes.
Across the street from Sunset.
Yes, right.
And I remember Katie and I had been out roaming the neighborhood one day. And I remember coming home, and Katie had big news for my parents, for my mother. She was the one that had the news. She's a little bit older than I am. But 2 new boys had moved in just over on Albert Street. Well, that was the Bemis family had moved in right there.
Yes,
So they moved in a couple of blocks away from us. And they had a boy who was older than I and a boy who was younger than I. And the younger one was especially shy. 2 redheaded boys. Well, that was the Bemis boys.
The Bemis boys.
Tom doesn't remember that. He doesn't know anything about it.
He doesn't want to remember it.
He doesn't. But he was scared of girls anyways. And then we became, I suppose, acquainted when I had his daughter Melissa in school. I had her in 2nd grade over at Edison School.
Yeah.
And got to know the family through Melissa, and then a few years later, Tom and I married.
Yeah, and he's such a nice man.
Oh, he's wonderful.
So,
yeah.
So intelligent, and he's so involved in so many things. Well, so are you. So you were at the high school all those years.
12 years.
And you did a terrific job, and you got involved with the theater up there at the high school, didn't you?
I did. As the theater arts teacher, I was the sponsor of the Mummers Club, which is still the name of the theater group there. And we just jumped into putting on plays and going to competitions and traveling around the state. Got to know those kids, and I really enjoyed getting to teach theater to kids because there's 2 reasons. One is the kids that are attracted to theater are often, not always, but often ones that that is their home on campus.
Yeah.
That's where they find the place where they are welcomed. And they may not always be a good fit in other areas on campus. Sometimes they are. So I would have kids that were in sports and kids that were in student government, but I also had kids that the place that they fit in was at the theater.
They were just pushed away from the other kids, but they found a home in the theater.
Yep, very often.
Yes, right.
And all of the kids there, whether they were the valedictorian, and I had some of those through the years, or they were the ones that didn't do anything else except theater, all of the kids in the theater bonded together. So they were a very tight-knit group within the confines of the theater there. And they supported each other, and they appreciated everything that was brought to the table. And the other reason that I really like teaching theater is because when you take a play, and we would write our own plays very often too, so when you write your own play, you're coming there with nothing but an idea. So they would come with that idea, and they would turn that idea into a finished production with a written script, with parts that they all carried out, brought to life, characters that they brought to life. They brought in the directors, they did the directing themselves, designed the costumes, the set, the lighting, the sound, brought it all together. So you start with nothing and you end up with the finished product.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes, and each doing their own delegated task.
But it was your guidance that led them into that area.
Well, I hope so. I kind of felt like I was the orchestra leader at times.
Yeah. I know. But then later on you became interested in another theater, didn't you?
How do you mean?
Our,
the community theater. Well, I actually did community theater before I started. Got started at the high school. Yes,
I forgot that.
I did. Yeah.
What was the first play you were in?
Well, it was one that was directed by your wife.
Yeah.
While the lights were out.
That's right. Yeah.
It was, and boy, that was a play that was plagued with problems from the beginning.
Yeah. Well, we won't go into that.
So it was a little bit of a rough introduction to the theater, but I enjoyed working with LaWanda.
But you know, when people don't realize this, what an actress or an actor go through, and then you're in front of a live audience, and if you forget a line, it's terrifying because you don't want to do that because the audience can spot it right away. And I'll never forget the time when I was in this play with Dr. We were playing with Mrs. Pitcatley, who was a fine actress, and Dr. Taylor, Brian Taylor. And a murder had happened. And I think it was one of the ladies we interviewed many, many years ago on Channel 23, Cheryl Cantwell. She was the body on the floor. And I'm the detective, and I'm going back and I'm starting to ask questions of how this might have happened. And Dr. Taylor and Lynn Pitcatley are sitting there, and they're watching me walk past them. And all of a sudden, my mind went completely blank. And I just said, so we have a murder committed here. And I'm walking back. We've got a body on the floor. We've got a murder. And Brian could see that I was in deep trouble. And he said, well, aren't you interested in how this might have happened? Ah, yes, that, and then all of a sudden it came back to me. But people don't realize how frightened you can get in front of a live audience.
It is. You just, what do I do now?
Well,
and can somebody please help me out here?
There are humorous things that happen too. Where I played, where was, you know, the curtain opened up, and I'm in charge of a hotel, and I don't have too many things to do except write, and all of a sudden, a gun comes out from the side, and I'm shot, and I'm killed, and somebody in the audience claps. And that always makes you feel good, you know what I mean?
It could have been a former student.
It could have been, you're right. I know who it was, I found out, but I won't mention his name. So anyway, and you've been involved, and you're still involved with lighting and sound and directing, and the last play you directed was what?
We did the Match Girl's Gift last November.
And a beautifully done play, by the
Thank
way.
you. Thank you.
And the young children in that play.
Weren't they something?
Oh, they did them remarkably.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not easy to direct young kids, but these kids came through like
and we had little Reagan Van Soest, who's 10 years old.
Yes.
And she was on stage 100% of the time. She
And-
just really carried that play off like a professional.
And never missed a line.
No.
She
no,
knew exactly where she
on top
was
of
supposed to
everything.
be. Well, anyway, I wanted to get into the new things that you're involved in right now.
Okay.
And if you'll fill me in on some of the... I've heard words from Guy about what it is, but I'm not familiar with what you're going through right now.
Okay, well, I'll do a quick mention about the play, if that's okay.
Yes, go. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yes, we don't.
Yeah, we do have a play going on right now,
Yeah.
The Trip to Bountiful, and that will run on, it will open February 14th, so February 14th and 15th, and then 21st and 22nd at 7:30, and February 16th at 2 o'clock.
Sunday, 2 o'clock matinee.
It is a Horton Foote play. It was done as a movie maybe 20 years ago now, longer than 20 years
Yeah,
ago,
I think so, yeah.
But a real touching play about an older woman who wants to get back to the land of her birth before she dies, and her journey, her trip to Bountiful. It's called Bountiful, Texas.
Oh.
And I get to play the lead in that, and it's a part that I've wanted to play for years, so I am thrilled to be doing it. Directed by Phil Tozier. And we've got a real nice cast doing it, so
That's what I've heard.
I'm enjoying it and excited about doing it. It's a touching play.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a good one to see.
Yeah.
Anyway, that keeps you busy.
She's got some big monologues. I'm not on stage 100% of the time, but close to it.
And you're also working, I understand, out at the caverns?
I do. Right now I'm on what they call intermittent status, which means I'm just going out there on an as-needed basis, but I'll start up again with the regular season probably in May.
In May.
I started doing that after I retired from teaching, and it has just been a thrill to work there. You know, I've gone to the caverns all my life, and now I've really gotten to learn about them. And because my grandmother worked there, I've just really dived into the history of the cave and wanting to know more about all of it. And one of the things that happened last year is I started reading about the people at the cave that were involved in World War II, and especially the people that were part of the National Guard in New Mexico and were sent as a regiment to the Philippines and were there when the Philippines were attacked by Japan. This was the day after Pearl Harbor.
Yes, right.
And fought on Bataan Peninsula in the Philippines, and then were surrendered to the Japanese and became Japanese prisoners of war for the duration of the war. And there were 7 men from the caverns that were involved in that, so I researched all of them and did an exhibit at the cave about them. And all of that time, I didn't know I was going to fall in love with them, and I did. I fell in love with every one of those men. Got to know their families, contacted their families, and have met members of their families now, and learned more about them. So I made an exhibit about them that was up last April during Bataan Corregidor Memorial Month. So that was up at the cave. But it didn't stop with that, because I kept researching them and kept contacting people.
Oh.
And during my research, I came across a lady named Jan Thompson, who had a film coming out called Never the Same, the POW Experience. Jan's father was a Japanese POW.
Oh my gosh.
And she had made a short film at the 70th anniversary in 2011 called The Tragedy of Bataan. And now she has produced a full-length documentary about Bataan and the POW experience. It involves the diaries and memoirs of men who were over there and interviews that she had with them. A very well done one, interviewed by a stellar cast, or not interviewed but narrated. The main one is Loretta Swit, who was one of the stars in MASH, the TV series. She played Hot Lips Houlihan. She's the narrator, but then it's got voices of Ed Asner, I can't remember all of them. Alec Baldwin is one of the voices on it, and then they're the diary voices narrating the diaries of these men. So it's a beautiful documentary, and to date it has been shown in the Chicago area, in Los Angeles, in Oregon, close to Portland.
Wow.
Very few screenings that have been done. But we are going to have a screening in Carlsbad of this film. I contacted Jan a couple of months ago and said, would it be possible to do a screening in Carlsbad? And she wrote me back and said yes. And
Whoa,
so
that's
we have
wonderful.
this screening that'll be coming up on March 3rd in Carlsbad. We've got it lined up to be at the Mall Cinema. Jan will be there along with Loretta Swit. They will do a presentation before the screening, and then we will show the documentary. Then that evening, there will be a meet and greet time that will be open to the public at the Pecos River Village. Jan and Loretta will both be there to meet people, to answer questions, to talk about the film especially.
Yeah.
And then the following evening, Tuesday, March 4th, there will be a lecture given by Jan and Loretta at the college. And this will be open to the public as well. So the tickets for the screening are $10 for adults, $5 for students. So it's, you know, an extremely good deal, very affordable.
Yes, yes indeed, absolutely.
Yeah. They can get the tickets by, and I don't have all the phone numbers, I'm sorry, but the tickets will be available from three of us that have been kind of heading this up, because when Jan said she could do this, I thought, well, what do I do now? So
Yeah.
I contacted Joe Epstein, who gets things done.
Oh, yes. Oh,
I
yes.
said,
Joe can do
Joe,
that.
I need your help with this. And then Joanna Seberg, whose father was also at Baton, Charlie James, was a survivor of Baton. And the three of us have been working on it. So by contacting the three of us, or they can go online, and again, I don't have the address for that yet either, but it is Carlsbad Main Street that will have the tickets for sale online.
Oh, good, good. Talking about that particular thing, General MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur, was in charge of the Philippines when this broke out. And of course, they got him out of there so he could direct traffic in different areas.
Right.
And then when I went into the Army, I was sent over to Japan. He was the general in charge of the group I was in the American 8th Army, which, by the way, is the 8th Army is the one that serves the MASH television show there in the 8th Army also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was a time that I couldn't get out of my system. You think about what they went through, and it just overwhelms you. And I'll never forget, in our office, we had two dogs. One, Daisy, came up with the American troops through the Philippines. And any time an American came in, she'd run over, wag her tail, and be picked up. But any time, and I'm sorry about this, that it happened, but any time a Japanese would come into our office, she'd go over and growl. She just could sense this. And she was one of the survivors in Bataan.
Wow. That is amazing
Yeah.
that she survived
Yeah,
through it.
yeah, yeah.
What my desire when I asked Jan to come do this is the same as my desire when I did the exhibit at the cave. I think that people don't know.
True.
And the National Guard in New Mexico had 1,800 men that were sent over to the Philippines. And only a half of them came back.
Yes, correct.
And of those half that came back, half of those were dead within a few years. It was a terrible price that they paid. Those men that went over as a group, and because they all went as a group, New Mexico had the highest per capita incidence of death in World War II because they were dying over there. They fought on Bataan. They starved on Bataan for the 4 months of fighting. The supplies did not come in. They didn't have ammunition. They didn't have food. As soon as they went to Bataan, which was Christmas Eve of 1941, their rations were cut in half.
Yes.
And then before too long, though, it was cut in half, and then it was, well, fend for yourself. Find what you can to eat. So they were eating lizards and they were eating parrots.
Whatever,
I read
yeah.
one about a man who caught a parrot and made it into jerky.
Yeah.
Whatever they could find to eat, they were eating. And then they went on the Bataan Death March, and that's what people hear about, is the Bataan Death March. That lasted a week, and 1,000 Americans died on it, 10,000 Filipinos died on it. It was horrible and it was brutal. But once they got to Camp O'Donnell, which is where they were going, they continued dying, 300 people a day dying there at Camp O'Donnell. The ones that survived were put on prison ships and sent to POW camps. The prison ships were called hell ships,
Yes.
because they were packed into the holds of these ships. Thousands of men put into a hold of a ship, and they might throw down a little bit of rice during the day. Jack Roop, who was one of the survivors from the cave, later went on to become sheriff of Eddy County,
That's
and then
correct.
a U.S. Marshal. He was on different hell ships because he had to change ships 4 times, about 90 days that he was in those horrible conditions, in the stifling holds.
Yeah.
So half of the men that went into those ships came out dead. And then they went into the POW camps where they served as slave labor for Japanese industries, companies like Mitsubishi. So they were working in coal mines, they were working in iron smelters, they were providing slave labor for the Japanese army during that time. So it was the entire experience, going over there before we were even in the hostilities and not coming out until many of them watched the bombs explode over Nagasaki and Hiroshima from the POW camps.
But isn't it, we should never forget what they went through, but isn't it nice that the two countries have realized how horrible it was, and we've become very friendly?
Yes,
and the Japanese who lived there, they went through, I went into Tokyo the first time. I couldn't believe the destruction of the city, the thousands of Japanese children and women who were killed in the bombing raids. And it was sad. It really, it broke my heart. And I was always trying to help the kids and the ladies. Is there anything I can do to help you? I had a bad attitude towards the other ones my age because they were the ones, we were the ones who were bitter enemies. But now the two countries are together, and that makes me feel much better.
yes.
And I don't think our two countries will ever come to that point again. At least I hope not. But
Well, of course, what we want is to learn to live in peace, to learn
absolutely,
to live in peace.
and the two countries are doing a good job as friends.
And I asked Joanna Seberg if her father felt animosity towards the Japanese, and she said he never did feel animosity towards the Japanese people. And also that while there were plenty of instances of brutality, there were also guards and people there that
were nice.
were human beings and acted like human beings.
Well, we only have about a minute left, but what do you do in your spare time? One sentence.
I am in training to go on the White Sands Missile Range Bataan Memorial Death March at the end of March. So when I am not working on these other things, I'm doing what I see you do all the time. I am beating the sidewalks, pounding the sidewalks, right. I've put a lot of miles under me getting in training for that 26-mile walk.
I want to discuss that with you when you get over that walk. Okay. Well, listen, Mannie, thank you so much for being our guest today. It's been a real pleasure. We've
Thanks
been friends for a
having
long
me.
time. And on behalf of Channel 23 and the Faces of Carlsbad, to all of our wonderful viewers, goodbye and good luck. Now we can shake hands again.